Hello guys, so welcome to another video on Tech Empire Python tutorials. In this video, we are going to be looking at the if else branching construct. So the if else branching construct is used if you have multiple pieces of code or multiple lines of code you want to execute for more than one condition. Remember, we saw the if statement and also we saw the if else statement. The if statement is when you have one condition for which you want you want a block of code to be executed, and you want or the if else statement is when you have two blocks of code, one for which you want to be executed when the condition is true and the other for which you want to be executed when the condition is false. So the if elif else or if elif statement comes in place when you have more than one condition. You have separate blocks of codes for different conditions, that's more than one condition. So right away, I'm going to be showing you the general flow diagram. Let's look at the problem we try to solve with an if-elif statement. We must have a problem. There must be a problem. There must be a reason why we should use this kind of statement instead of the if-else. Why should we use the if-elif um, statement instead of the if-else statement? So I'm going to be showing you the general flow diagram of the if-elif statement. All right, let's look at it right now. All right, now look at this flow diagram. We have condition 1, which is a Boolean expression, which is condition 1. If this condition is true, we have a statement we want to execute. If it's false, we test for condition 2. If condition 2 is true, we execute statement 2. If condition 2 is false, we test for another condition. It can be multiple conditions right up to a final condition, condition n. That's how we say in mathematics. You can have 1 billion conditions, 1,000 conditions, 10 conditions, 2 conditions, or 3 conditions, whatever. But at the final condition, we now test. You can test for it. If the condition is true and you execute. One thing you should notice about this statement is once condition 1 is true, it doesn't test for condition 2. Once condition 1 is true, statement 1 is executed and execution will continue from below the if else statement. The execution will not test for condition 2 again. That's, we don't do repetition. If one condition is found to be true, the rest of the conditions are ignored because it's already found a solution to the problem. So you must structure your code in such a way that once a condition is true, the statement for that condition or the code for that condition is executed and the rest of the conditions are skipped. I'm going to show you now an example where we implement the if else statement poorly. That's, we test for all the conditions. That's going to take more programming time, and more of the programming, more time is going to be wasted. That's why we have the if else statement. So let's look at let's look at an example where we have multiple conditions and we have multiple pieces of code which are executed based on the truth or false value of that condition. Now here is a script. We have three variables: max var, which points to an object with a value 100. We have mid var, which assigned to an object with a value 50, an integer object, and we have low var, which is assigned to an integer object with a value 0. Now, what we want to do is to print if the user is supposed to get, we want to get the value from the user. Once we get that value from a user, we convert it to an integer and we assign it to the variable user input. Now we test if that variable is greater than max var. Of course, you see max var is 100. We can, if not, we test if it's greater than or equals to mid var. If not, we test if it's greater than or equals to low var. And lastly, we check if it's less than low var. All right, so take note of this function. What we take the user input to check if it's greater than max var. Of course, max var is 100. If it's greater than 100, we print level 1, you exceeded 100. Next, we check if it's greater than mid var, which is 50, greater than or equals, which means if it's 50 and above, we print out level 2, value between 50 and 100. Next, we check. You see, this in these cases, we are only using if. I'm going to update the program a little bit so you understand. So we test this condition. If it's true, the if code will be executed and execution will continue from here. We test it. So now let's execute our program and see how the output works. So let's see how the program works. Now we have let's get 101. You see level 1, this value or this code, this condition expression evaluated to true because the user entered, I entered 101. If you say 101 is greater than max bar, of course 101 is greater than 100, so we have this printed out. Now notice this is also going to be tested because it's not within an else block. It's a separate if statement on its own, but it's going to be false because user input is greater than or equals to mid var. Is the value greater than or equals to mid var? All right, so I think the wrong script was running. Let's try this again. 101. Okay, now I want you to realize something. All the if conditions are checked. Now let's see the problem with this code. This code has a little problem. Let's try to find out the problem. We said if user input is greater than 100, which is true, we executed, you exceeded 100. Now we had to do the second condition. Remember, it's not within the else block, it's on its own if condition. So user input is greater than 50, it's also greater than 50. So we say you level 2, you see level 2, and all this is printed out. Now we check if it's greater than or equals to 100. It's greater than or equals to 100, yes, of course. So this is also printed out. And this last one, is it less than 0? No. So this is not printed out. So this if code is skipped because this condition evaluates to false. User input was 101, is less than 0, false, because 101 is not less than 0. So this is the only code that was skipped. Now we actually want only one of these code blocks to be executed. That if this is executed, this should not be executed, and this should not be executed. If this is executed, none of these other 2 or 3 should be executed. If this is executed, none of this should be executed. For example, let's say we enter the value 50. Let me show you what's happening. Let's say we enter the value 50. Now look what happens. This condition now is false because user input is 50 and user input is not greater than max var. Max var is 100. Is 50 greater than 100? No. So these conditions will not be printed out. After execution will continue from here. Now this condition is true because user input is not greater than mid var but is equals to mid var. So greater than or equals to is going to evaluate to true. But now we still have a problem because this also evaluated to true. So this was printed out and this was false. So this wasn't printed out. Now if we did, let's say 30, let's use 30. In the case of 30, this will evaluate to false because if user input greater than max var, user input is more than 30, 30 is not greater than 100. This will also evaluate to false because 30 is not greater than 50, but this will evaluate to true because 30 is greater than 0 because user input is 30, it's greater than or equals to low var. Low var is let's see, low var is 0 and 30 is greater than. So this will be executed. This if code will be executed, but this will not be executed because 30 is not less than low var. Low var is 0, as you can see, and is 30 less than 0? No. So this will result return false. So this code here will not be executed. Now execution will just continue from line 23. That's why we have goodbye here at the result. So next, what's going to happen is, let's try the last value. Let's say -2, for example. Let's use -2, -2. Now, in -2, this condition will be false because -2 is not greater than 100. This condition will also be false. So this if code will be skipped. This if code will be skipped. This condition will also be false because -2 is not greater than 0. But this condition will be true because -2 is less than 0. So we have last level value below 0. So this was printed out. Now we want to fix this. To fix this is where the else statement comes into place, because remember, we cannot use the else because the else, if we can't use the else in any of these, because if we use the else, for example, in this situation, what's going to happen is you can only use the else if you have one condition, but here we have multiple conditions, so we have the temptation of using multiple if. You understand? Another way of doing this, of simplifying this code using only if you don't want to use if elif, is to do as follows. Let me write the code and show you. So here is a better way of writing the previous code. As you can see, what we're trying to solve is to prevent the if condition from being executed once one of the we're trying to prevent other if condition from being executed once the first if condition evaluates to true. We don't want to keep testing other conditions. Once we found the first if condition evaluating to true, we don't want to continue testing the other if conditions or executing them. So what we do is we try to put all the other if conditions within the else block of the previous if. So for example, here is an example I'm going to explain to you so you understand. Now we say if user input is greater than max var, we have a piece of code. If not, what we do is we say else. So this else code is only going to be executed. Take note, all this belongs to the else code for this else statement. Take note of the indentation of this. Take note, you can see everything is indented from this line, as you can see the line. Now, if this condition is false, this else code will be executed. Okay. If this condition is true, this else code will be this if code will be executed, and the whole of this else code will be skipped. All right. Now the else code also has another if statement. We called it a nested if. Now, as you see, let's assume this code, for example, this condition was false. So now we are within the else block. The else block also has an if statement. Now, the else block have a conditional statement. If this condition is true, this if code here will be executed. If not, the else code will be executed. Now, take note of the indentation of the else code. It's the same distance from here. All right. Now, this else code also has an if statement. And the if statement also has an if condition. If this condition is true, this if code will be executed. Else, if the condition is false, this else code will be executed. Now, this else code also has an if statement. And here is the if statement, and here is the if condition. Now, if this condition is true, this statement will be executed. If not, we don't have an else part here, so nothing is going to be done, but execution is going to continue from the end from here. Now let's test it to see. I'm going to start like how we started in the previous section. I'm going to enter 101. All right, so 101. Now what happened? As you can see, only one of the if code was executed. We don't have all the if code executing as before. Now we see level 1, you exceeded 100. What happened? The user entered 101. Now user input is equal to 101. User input, is it greater than max var? Max var is 100. Is 101 greater than 100? It returns true. You can test that here, for example. You can say 101 greater than 100 to see it's true. So because it's true, this if code is going to be executed. Here is the reply. This is what you get. Level 1, you exceeded the 100. Now, this else code is going to be skipped, and execution is going to continue from the end. So you see goodbye. And how do you know the end? The end has the same indentation as the if and else part. You can see the same indentation. All right, let's go to let's assume this was false. So let's enter a value like 90. Now what happened? We have level 2 printed out. That's all. What happened? This if statement, this if code statement or condition evaluated to false because 90 is not greater than 100. So the else part will be executed. Now, the else part also has an if code. Let's check it out. It said user input greater than mid var. It's 90 greater than mid var 50. Is 90 greater than 50? Of course, yes. So this if code is going to be true. This if condition is going to be true. So the if code, this part will be executed, and this else code will be skipped. This else code will be skipped. So we have only one of the if codes executed. So you see it's only this that will be executed. This one will be skipped because it's within the else. This one will be skipped. Everything here will be skipped because as you can see, it's within the else, it's part of the else block or the else suite or is the else code. Now let's enter a value like 49 and see what happens. Now 49. Okay. Now what happens is first we receive the input. This if condition is checked. Is 49 greater than 100? No. So the else block will be executed. Now the else block also has an if statement this here. Now user input, is it greater than 50 or greater than or equal to 50? No, 49 is not greater than or equal to 50. So this if code will be skipped and this f block will execution will enter the f this else block. Now this else block also has an if else statement, as you can see. It also has an if else statement. Now the if statement says is user input greater than or equals to low value. Of course, yes, low value is 0. User input is 49, as you can see here. So is 49 greater than or equal to 0? Yes. So this if code will be executed. This if code will be executed. And this else block will be skipped. Now, you don't need to put an if here. You can just leave it as an else. Okay, you can leave it as an else, but let's put an if. Now, let's use the value -1 to see. -1. Okay, now this last part was executed. Why? Because this condition will be false. So execution will get into this else block. Once it gets here, it tests for this condition will be false. So execution will enter this else block. Once it enters, the first statement is an if statement which tests for this condition will be false. So execution will be in this else. Now in this else, we can as well just print because once we get into this else, that's true. But what we had to do to a step we did here just to make things to be obvious is that we actually still checked is user input less than low val. Of course, we enter -1 which is less than 0. So this if condition is true, hence this code here will be executed. Now, as you can see, we haven't used the elif. If you're very keen, you will discover some kind of else if here, else if here, else if here. In Python or in programming in general, we the people who design the programming language or programmers realize that this else if is very common, this combination of else if, where you have an else and the first statement under the else is an if. We have an else, the first statement under the else is an if. We have an else, the first statement under the else is an if. So instead of going into deeper levels of nesting, instead of going into deeper levels of nesting, the programmer decided to bring to design an elif code. Elif is the same as else followed by if, just like what we did here, but it's a combination to make life simpler for programmers. So elif means else if. You understand? In most programming languages, it's known as else if, but Python calls it elif just to make it short. So as you see, it's very easy to transform this code to an elif code. So it's very simple. You just need to do this. Let me transform it so you see clearly. So you know elif, you don't need to. So you see how we can just simply transform this to an elif code. Just simple elif and yeah, an elif can end with an else. So we can just say else, or we can still say elif. And what we have done is we have converted simply before your own eyes, we have converted that code to an elif code now by using the Python's elif statement. Now I want to show you something. Let's see the general flow diagram of an elif statement so you can better understand what's happening here. So as you can see from this flow diagram, we have multiple conditions, but the main reason we use an if elif is we just want one of those conditions to be executed. That's we just want one of the condition code to be executed. For example, if this condition is true, this block or the if condition, the if code or the if block will be executed. If this condition is false, we test for this other condition. That's the else if or the elif. Else if. Now we test for this condition. If this condition is true, the elif block will be this block will be executed, or this code will be executed. We can call it a block of code, or we can call it a code suite, like I explained in the previous video. So once any of these codes are executed, execution continues from the rest of the program right up to the end. It does not test the other conditions. So these are like shortcuts, these are like bridges. Once it passes through, it never goes back again. So if this is blocked, it comes here, it checks this. If this is blocked, it comes here, it checks this. If this is blocked, it goes here and goes out here. Now, if this is not blocked, it goes here and goes out here. If this is not blocked, it passes here and goes out here. So the first condition that evaluates to true is like a complete bridge. It doesn't check and it just passes through that bridge and goes to the end. It will not come back to check the other conditions. So if this condition is false, it checks this condition. If this condition is true, it executes the condition block and moves forward to the rest of the program. If this condition is false, it goes to the next condition, right up to maybe over 1 million conditions. But of course, you don't have that in a real program. You may have 10 conditions, 12 conditions, probably a menu, and so on. You can use other methods to implement this if else statement, but the best, some other programming languages have what they call switch case, but Python doesn't have the switch statement. Okay, in this case, so what we do is, you see the final part is else. You can still you can have a program without the else part. You can have if elif without an else. You can have if elif, elif, and you end. But most of the time, you always see an if elif ending with an else statement. So, and the else is when the last if elif statement is false, and of course, you just have to do the last piece of code, block of code will be executed. The else is always executed when all the previous elif blocks are all false. That's the if and all the elif blocks are false, then the else code is just executed. But if you end it with an if else, there's probably a possibility that if that condition 2 is false, nothing will be executed. But this else statement acts as a fallback. That's if all these conditions fail, this one will always execute, because if this is false, this will be tested. If this is false, this will be tested. If this is false, this will just be executed. There's no testing here. As you can see, this is an else statement. It does not have a testing. It does not have the Boolean expression or a conditional expression. It's just else. So if this fails, this fails, this fails, this will be executed. Okay, but in case, let's say this was absent, it means if this failed, this failed, this failed, execution will continue from here. You understand? We don't have any block of code to be executed as a fallback. So let's look at the code again, which we simplified, so we can be able to see how this works physically. Now, look at this piece of code. It's a simplified version of the previous code we had. So now, we have if user input is greater than this or max bar, this code will be executed. If not, the elif part will be executed. The elif also has a condition just like the if. Like we saw, this were previously else if statements, but now you see we have no indentation, it's just straight. It simplified the code for us, unlike the previous code. This code is simpler and neater, and so you see how the if statement helps us rather than having an else, and within the else we have another if statement. So in this case, you can see the elif statement also has a condition. If this condition is true, this block will be executed, and execution will continue from line 20. Once one of the elif block, in fact, right from the if this statement is true, execution, if this condition is true, this code will be executed, and this code will be executed. Line 9 and line 10 will be executed, and execution will continue from line 20. If not, this code will also be checked. And if this is true, line 12 and 13 will be executed, and execution will continue from line 20. But if this expression is false, then this will be checked. If this is true, line 15 and 16 will be executed. If not, if it's false, then this will be checked. If this is also false, then this code will not be executed. Execution will continue from here. But let's say in case we place an else statement here, and just have an else statement. In this case, if this is false, this will be tested. If this is false, this will be tested. If this is false, this will be tested. If this is false, then the else block will just be executed before the rest of the code will be executed. So let's try and see how this works to make sure our code is actually correct. So if you enter 101, you see we just have you exceeded 100, which means this condition was true. Line 8 was true. So line 9 and line 10 was executed, and execution skipped all the rest of the elif statement right down to this. And you see goodbye. Now let's execute it with 99, or let's say 80. As you can see, this statement will be false, so this will be checked. And when this is checked, it's going to be true because 980 is greater than mid-var, which is 50. So this if elif code will be executed, and all the rest will be skipped right up to this point. Okay. Now let's see. What if we had let me say we had let's say we get 49. Let's enter 49. Now we see this was checked false, this was checked false, and this was now checked. We see this was true. So once this became true, execution will skip this. This will not be checked again, and execution will continue from line 22. So now let's try let's say -1. Now this was checked, it was false, this will be false, so this will be checked too, and this was also checked, was false, this will be checked. Is this true? Yes. User input is -1. -1 is less than low var, which is 0, so this will be executed. Now since this is executed, the else part will also be skipped, and execution will continue from here, which says goodbye. Now let's enter a value. It's not possible, we can't even get into this no match, because we can't even get into this no match. We can't get into this no match. So this no match is if all these values fail. Is it possible for everything here to fail? Let's see. Okay, let's say instead of using low var, we use negative, let's say -5. Okay, let's run this. Now look what's going to happen. Okay, let's say we enter -1. Now in this case we have no match, because let's say or let me say let's use -2, or let's say negative yeah, let's say -5. So you can see, is user input less than -5? No, -1 is not less than -5. So the else part was printed out, no match, because this condition was false, so the else part executed. But if we had no else part here, like I was trying to explain to you, see what will happen in case we enter -1. -1. You see, it just has goodbye, because this was tested, it was false. After this was tested false, this was tested false, this was tested false. So there was no else part, so execution just had to continue from line 20. But once you have an else part, if all the if and the elif statements are false, the final part, which is the else part, will be executed, and you're going to have no match. So I'm still going to enter -1. Since everything is false, we are going to land here. We're going to learn in no match. So here's typically how the if elif statement works. The if elif statement can end with an else, or like I showed you previously, there might be no else at all. You may just have end with an if elif without any else. But most times programmers end it with an else. The else is like the default code that should be executed when every other condition above fails. Then the else code will be executed. So now let's look at another example, just a simpler example that makes more sense than this example. All right, so you understand the concept properly. All right, so here's another example where I'm trying to demonstrate the if elif else statement to you, or the if elif statement. As you can see on line 1, we have a print statement, we welcome the user. Line 2, we collect an input from the user, we still save that, or we assign user input, the identifier user input to that value. You know, it's a string, so we have to convert it to a number. In this case, I want to convert it to a float. So I use the float inbuilt function to convert the user input, which is a string, to a float. Now I store that value in score. Now I have an if statement. An if statement is used to test two conditions. You understand? Like I explained in the previous video, you can use the um, logical or expression to combine two conditions. As you can see, I said if score is less than 0 or score is greater than 100. In this case, either of these condition, if either of these condition evaluates to true, this if statement will be executed. So for example, let me run the code. If, in case I enter 101, you see this part was executed. Now, as you can see, 101 is greater than, false or true is true, true or false is true, false or false will be false. So in this case, this is true because even though 100 is not less than 0, it's greater than 100, and this will be false, this will be true. This statement will be true, while this statement will be false. But false or true, it's true. So since this condition expression evaluated to true, this if code will be executed. And like I explained earlier, all these other if elif or else will be skipped, and the execution will continue from line 26, which says thanks, goodbye. So you see, you enter the 101, score must be between 0 and 100. Of course, if I enter -1, this will also hold, because as you can see, this will also hold. Why? Because score now is less than 0, which is -1. So this will be true, this will be false, but true or false will give it true. So this will be executed, which indicates all this will be skipped. Now, if the user enter a score greater than 80, but of greater than 80, let's check this. So let's say, for example, I enter 90. You see, this condition now will be false because this will be false and this will be false. 90 is greater than 100 is false. 90 is less than 0 is false. So it will come to the elif statement, which checks, is 90 greater than 80? Yes. So this will be printed out. Excellent. Your score is 90. You earn grade A. What of if I entered, let's say, 71, for example? 71. Let's say. All right. Let's say. Okay, let's say I get 71. Okay, in this case, this is false, but this is true because 71 is greater than or equals to 70. Yes, so this will be good. Your score is 71 and your grade is B. Let's say in this case, I enter, well, let's say 55. Let's see 55. Okay, 55. Let's see. Now we have this will be false, this will be false, this will false, and you come here, this will be true because 55 is greater than 50. So these three if state, the if code will be executed, which is these three statements. Now, if all this evaluates to false, let's say we have 44, for example. If we have 44, all this is going to evaluate to false, and like I told you, the else part will just be executed. Let's say, for example, we just ended with this. Let's see what's going to happen if we ended only with the elif without any else. Let's see what's going to happen. So let's say we entered 44, nothing. Why? Because this statement is false, this statement is false, this statement is false, this is false, and execution just continues from line 22. But in case we had this in place, let's say in case we had this in place, the else part, like I told you earlier, if this is false, this false, this false, this false, execution will finally, the interpreter will finally execute this because it's just else. So this is false, this is false, this is false, this is false. So the else part will be executed. So I've explained to you, you now can now see the difference between ending the elif statement with an else and ending it with an elif. Okay. Now, Finally, I want you to know from this example that the order matters, of course, because let's say we had 50 here and we had 70 here. Now let's try something. Let's try, not like, let's just put this code, let's just replace the codes so we don't have any problem. Let's replace the codes. Now look at something. If you look at this, this is still very correct. Of course, if score is greater than or equals to 50, it's not bad. You have, and while if score is greater than 70, of course. But I want to show you the other matters because, like I told you, this is a bridge. The first one that matches will be executed and the other ones will be skipped. So you expect this to be actually, if I enter 71, you expect this code to be executed. So let's see what's going to happen, whether that's what's going to happen. Okay. Um, let's whether that's going to, okay, see what we have. Your score is 75. Yes, not bad. You earn grade. See, that's wrong. It means this one was executed. This one was executed. Of course, that's not a lie because it came here, this was false. It came here, it checked this was false. It checked this. Of course, 70 is greater than or than 50. So this condition will be true. And of course, this statement will be executed. Even though this is still true, since one of the conditions have already been met, all this will be skipped and execution will continue from here. The best way to if you want to put your conditions in any order, and you have to use strict bounds. So what's strict bounds? Now I'm going to update this program in a way which uses strict bounds so that you're going to see how that works. Okay. All right, so as you can see, I've used strict bound. As you can see, instead of just saying score greater than 50, I said score greater than 50 and score should be less than 70, which means if I enter 70, this statement will be false because 70 is not less than 70. So, but this statement will be true because 70 is greater than or equal to 70 and is less than 100. I also added the strict bound here. This value should be greater than 80 and also less than 100. So now if you execute this, say in case I use 71 as previously, you see the right code, this one is executed because this will be false. This will also be false because though the value is greater than or equal to 50, it's not less than, though the value is greater than or equal to 70, it's not less than 50. And when you use an and, both statements must evaluate to true. This must be true, this must be true. False and true is false. True and false is false. False and false is false. Only true and true is true. So score is greater than or equal to 70, true. Score is less than 100, true. So this will be executed. You understand? And whatever other condition will be will be false. So that's how you implement strict bounds for if you want your elif conditions to be in any order. You understand? You can also test for strings and all those stuff. We are going to see that in different examples. So I hope with this video you'll be able to understand clearly how the if elif statement works or how the if elif else statement works. So see you in the next video and have a nice time. All right.